Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Psychology Talk podcast. Today, I'm once again joined by Eric Cathcart. Eric is a funeral event planner and producer and owner and founder of InRemeber, a company that helps to celebrate the story of loved ones' lives. We follow up our discussion from last year on end-of-life planning and the process of shared grief through celebration. We also again touch on the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the process of grief and life celebrations. Eric, once again, welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Good to see you, Scott.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Yeah. Well, can you catch us up on what's been going on with you, with the industry for end-of-life celebrations and funerals and whatnot since last year? And if you have any kind of insights into how grieving has been stalled or postponed for some, or still going forward.
Yeah. I'm afraid that we're still in a holding pattern on gathering for shared grief for funerals. It's somewhat shifted over to social media from my experience. It was interesting to watch people who have lost somebody's died in their life, and they've become much freer about sharing that grief on Facebook or whatever their platform is. I find that's really been one of the most amazing things that I've witnessed. Unfortunately, I would say that we're pretty much in the same place that we were a year ago, as far as getting back together for large gatherings, for funerals or weddings or whatever. Just finished a hybrid wedding. I'm an event producer for folks that don't know exactly what I do. I'm an event producer that accidentally found my way into the funeral industry and saw a need that was not being filled. So we can talk about that in a second. But it's still, even with weddings, they're very, very much slimmed down, and people are still cautious about gathering, and I think that's a very healthy thing to do at the moment. But as I said a year ago, and I predicted that the funeral industry, the funeral homes and directors, really were not on top of their game. Oh, that's my dog in the background here.
That's all right. Dogs are permitted here.
And churches, houses of worship, just have not. They were not prepared for the pandemic, and they still are behind in figuring out how to reach their congregations and help people through the grieving process. So I don't know what to say about that.
So it's still, well, we will simultaneously with this broadcast, we'll rebroadcast last year's interview, which was pretty thorough on a lot of those topics, I think, when they were fresh in everybody's mind at the beginning of the pandemic. What do you think the psychological impact of this, since this is a psychology podcast, what do you think the psychological impact of this, not able to in person celebrate a loved one's life after they pass, what do you think that has been? I mean, I actually have been to a Zoom funeral, which was, I gave a eulogy of sorts in July, I think, of last year, June or July. And that was different. It was kind of fun, but it was still not the same as actually meeting and being able to hug people and share your tears in person. But I'm wondering what your insight is from being in the business.
Yeah, I don't think there's any substitute for hugging somebody, for being in community together. I think that we've gone through the Zoom experiment. It's going to continue. I think that we certainly pivoted and got into hybrid and virtual events. And I think that's going to stay to a degree. I think I'm absolutely sold on the virtual, on hybrid events, because it's opened up literally a world to me where I can be working with a family in Ethiopia on a funeral, and that was something that I just did not ever imagine happening.
So you actually worked with a family in Ethiopia with a
well, I mean, I live in Washington, D.C., so there's a big diaspora, big Ethiopian diaspora here. But
wow.
But with anybody that's from another culture, they've got one foot in that culture in that country and another foot here. So that's really, really opened up an opportunity to share the story of someone's life through video and images and narration and those different mediums. So that's been the encouraging part, where the pandemic's helped break down the barriers of what I thought I couldn't do. And now I feel very. I just did an event the other week, last weekend, and it was a hybrid, and folks were in Hawaii and all over the place, and we're doing this live, and it was fabulous, and we all understood that was the trade-off, but we were still. I would say we, because I get involved with the production. We were all together, although it wasn't personal. Personally, we weren't together, but we were virtually together, and that was pretty darn neat. And it was really neat to have the guests on the Zoom session, and that this was their first Zoom experience. So it was hard to believe that some people still haven't gotten onto the Zoom platform yet. But yeah, that's the encouraging part. But going back to your original question, I don't think that there's any substitute for, especially when somebody dies, to get together. We just have to. I think we're hardwired to get together and share stories and swap pictures.
Yeah, and to be there for each other. And so this must be having a huge impact on people's psyches at this point in time.
I would imagine there just isn't any closure. So I'm sort of preparing my business for a flood of, hopefully, I don't mean to say hopefully, but hopefully we will be able to service families that need closure. So we've been preparing for a rush of business that will probably happen in the fall.
And what do you attribute that? Like, not obviously, there's only a percentage of people who have been affected immediately by the COVID-19 virus. So these aren't going to all be people who have had that issue. But has there been, like, basically the industry has been closed down because of the pandemic? So people who have lost loved ones to accidents or old age, perhaps, are also kind of in a holding pattern. Yeah,
they're in the same bucket. Not everybody that died this past year or even today, was the result of COVID. It was, death happens all the time.
Yeah.
and all of those folks have been pushed to the side, and I don't know what the psychological damage is to those families, but my feeling is that because I'm more focused on celebration of life memorials, that can happen anytime. So it's okay. There's no rush to do this. We will do it. It will happen when the time is right and when everybody feels comfortable to gather again.
Okay. What other changes have you seen in the industry? I know last year you spoke of like how things were shifting to end-of-life celebrations, such as what you found yourself kind of falling into. And maybe you can even kind of go back and talk about how you fell into the business as an event planner. And what's like, has the industry even more so been affected if you've been keeping an eye on that? Like, for instance, are funeral directors having a hard time? Is everyone having a hard time in that sector of industry? And is it causing it to change and shift more?
I think that the funeral industry, as we know it, the conventional funeral industry has not changed. If anything, they've learned how to move quicker and more safely. I'm not a funeral director myself, but I am involved in the funeral directors world with their associations and meetings and the way they talk to each other. I'm part of that conversation. But they're just not, as I said a year ago, they're just not tooling themselves up fast enough to change with the culture. So they're still going on as they have for the past 150 years of kind of, this is how we do it. And that's okay. That's what they do. But they still are missing the social piece of gathering. They're not really focused on that. And I think that, maybe it was because of safety that they've pretty much are processing bodies as they always have been. But I'm not seeing a lot of celebration of life memorials in the funeral parlors. I'm not seeing that kind of buzz that's what they're doing. I think that for the past year, the funeral industry has been having a difficult time trying to figure out the technology piece of it. And the same thing with churches. They are still in really some of them have adapted and gone virtual, and that's a great thing. But again, a lot of them just didn't. They weren't there when they needed to be there, and they're still, in my opinion, some churches are not there for their congregations still, and especially on the funeral side.
Okay.
That's my viewpoint. I'm sure that's not true for a lot, but I'm just that's sort of my bias.
Your perspective.
My perspective.
Okay. Well, maybe you can kind of share how you did move into this event planning, which you still do to some degree, and into end of life celebrations.
Well, I've been a professional event producer or event planner for the past 25 years, and I had about 3 years ago or more now, I fell into helping a family produce a celebration of life memorial, and it just felt so right, and I completely the light bulb went off, and it just was. Made so much sense that I my entire life I had been preparing to kind of focus my skills to this part of the funeral world that's just not being serviced enough for families. We're sort of hardwired to kind of follow the status quo. This is when somebody dies, blah blah blah. Here are all of the events that are going to have to happen. I am an advocate for. I've since a year ago, I've really kind of settled into the role of being a grief advocate. So I'm really focused on helping families find the creativity of the death process of grief. And I believe that that when somebody dies, there's a very creative opportunity that can happen for the families and friends to go through. So that's what I've been focused on for the last 3 years is kind of refining and disrupting the funeral industry the best that I can. Not in a bad way. I just think that I think the funeral industries can do so much better, and that's where I'm focused. And I'm not the only one that's feeling this way. I just keep running into more and more and more people that are moving down this road.
And do you think that's more of like, I mean, funerals typically in the West at least have been, let's get the show on the road. The person's gone. Let's cleanly dispose of the body. Let's say a few nice things. And okay, there you go. And then the real grieving takes place, right? There's not a kind of spaciousness to holding the process of that loss or the feeling of that loss, either for the, departed, if you will, loved one, or for more so for the community that is feeling that loss. And do you think you provide more of a spaciousness to a kind of, if you will, from therapy, a holding environment for safety and acknowledgement?
I think that I think the space that I occupy is between a funeral director or a funeral home and a house of worship. There's a big, big void in between the two that is largely undeveloped, and that's the space that I'm interested in exploring more. Whereas you can have a celebration of life memorial anywhere at any time. And when I mean at anywhere, it doesn't have to be in a church. It doesn't have to be in a funeral home. It can be under a tent. It could be on a farm. It could be on a beach. It could be absolutely anywhere. And why should it be limited to just a couple of hours? Because there's another family coming in on the back of your service at the funeral home. I'd like to explode that opportunity. So if a family wants to get together, can we find a place that everybody could stay together? Like a retreat or something like that. Because the grief you can't turn it on. You can't turn it off. Grief goes on forever. And I just fundamentally disagree with kind of the wham bam thank you ma'am kind of let's move it on and let's just get over it. And then maybe that's the cultural problem that we have in our country, is that we do look at grief and we look at judgmentally people that are in grief and say, well, can't you get over it? That's not how grief works. It's not that neat.
No. I would say in grief just doesn't have to be reserved for the loss, the death of someone. It can be the end of, people grieve when they retire, or people grieve when they to some extent, if they have a relationship that goes away, or if they move on from a job and they, or losing friends from college just because you're out of touch with them. There's all sorts of ways to kind of look at the gap that's there. And the entire world has been in grief since the pandemic. Is we've lost our privileges, we lost our freedom, we lost a lot of things. And so for anybody who says, well, get over it, well, just take a look at yourself. How do you feel about, all of the things, missing an entire year of your life, or missing a graduation, or missing your family that you haven't seen or touched or hugged for over a year? That's what grief is.
It goes on and on. So I'm interested in exploring that. I'm interested in helping my family clients explore their grief and find a creative outlet to get through it, not get around it, but to get through it. And part of that creative process of celebration of life memorials is to permit the family to do whatever they want to do, without any rules or judgment. I think it's an incredible opportunity, a creative opportunity and therapeutic opportunity to work through a death, to be part of that. And part of that is telling the story of somebody's life, and then coming out of that story with some sort of a message that your loved one left you with. What was the lesson? What did you learn from this person's life? I get very excited when I get involved with the family and I get to learn the story of somebody's life. It makes me a better person.
Oh yeah. I think that it reminds me of there is a kind of two-way street in the consulting room for psychotherapy. Excuse me. Every patient that I see, to one degree or another, is going to have an effect on my growth as a person and as a healer and therapist. And I think that every person that we meet, and to one degree or another, is going to have an impact on our functioning. I think our relationships really are how we explore ourselves and develop ourselves, and do that kind of soul alchemy. I don't think we're not independent operators affecting objects in a void. So, yeah. I'm wondering. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No. Go you.
Oh, I'm wondering. The creativity of this, like how do you help a person move from maybe grief to looking at grief as sadness and loss and feeling empty or an emptiness, to evoking creativity to kind of not to denigrate or dismiss the grief, but to kind of use it as a creative process.
We had done a celebration of life memorial for a young man. He was 32 years old, and he had died in a kayak accident in Puget Sound, off the Puget Sound. And his body was never found. It was one of those tragic lost at sea kind of things. And absolutely devastating for his friends and family. He was on his way to becoming a Michelin star chef, and it was just absolutely heart-wrenching, especially with his friends, his contemporary friends that he grew up with from high school. They were all there. This was before the pandemic. But his mother was an artist. Her mother is an artist, and she hand dipped candles, remembrance candles. Each candle she hand dipped for the guests as a gift. She hand dipped 32 times in memory of her son, and that was just an extraordinary experience to hear her explain how she made these candles. And that was a prime example of being creative and doing something that you couldn't buy off the shelf. You couldn't look in the catalog and buy it. It was just the incredible gift that she gave everybody. And it was a therapeutic opportunity for her to work through the loss of her son. So that's just one of many examples.
Wow. Okay. Wow. And so learning from your clients, maybe do you use that as an example of ways people can invoke creativity in other clients? Like, do you share that as a way to kind of like, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, third-party stories are fine, but Um, I function as an advisor. So when I'm working with a family, and we start to go through photographs, and I think that's always a great place to start. I love working with families with photographs, and they'll often just we'll pick up, or they'll deliver shoe boxes full of photographs, and we'll scan them in and clean them up and digitize them and get them ready for some sort of a presentation. But photos are a great way to kind of turn the creative juices on, because it just gets your mind moving in the right direction. And then I'll make some suggestions like, well, what about music? What do you think would be good for music? So I'm nurturing the families to go down the creative road of saying, oh, well, okay, well, what about this? And what if we did this kind of a narration, or who could do this, or who could do that? I get because I'm a very creative person, I'm able to kind of stimulate, or I know it's in there. I know it's in all of us. So I think that my role is to stimulate that creativity and say, where would you like this to go? And trust me, there's no rules or judgment. You can go anywhere you want to go with this. I will help you. So I think that opens up a lot. And I don't think that you're going to find that creativity in the funeral industry. That's not what they do. I totally respect what they do. That's not what I do. So I supplement. I feel like what we're doing is the next step after working with the funeral home and going through the logistical things that you have to do, death certificate and cremation or full body burial. So my job is the storytelling side of everything. Although I am now getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the green burial movement. I think that's the next big thing.
Okay, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm very much a green person anyway, but it just seems to be the right thing. We're quickly running out of space. So I'm the typical kind of client that I'm going to be attracted to, or they're attracted to me, is somebody that's more focused on the environment and thinking about the planet. And those are the very same people that would think about their death in pre-planning, or they would think about their loved one and go, well, look, Roger didn't want to be embalmed. Let's look to the woods. And that's the big thing that I see in the funeral industry that's coming up is going to be conservational burial. And that's something that I've within the past year, maybe call that my COVID project, is that I've been really focused on conservational burials. And that's really not just focused on the body and the family, but I'm also focused on the environment, focused on the trees. So woodland burials have become are going to be a big thing you're going to see coming up. Or we're running out of space because cemeteries are just it's like real estate. It's like housing real estate. It's just incredibly expensive. $1,000 a square foot is just too much. Or $1 million for a mausoleum in Brooklyn. In a Brooklyn cemetery.
I was in Woodlawn for several years, which is a Irish expat community. So when I was there, people would be very friendly with me, and some of them would kind of back off because a lot of people were undocumented immigrants. So they think I was from Leitrim or Cavan, and then they'd open my mouth up and they'd know I was a Yank, and they'd walk away from me. Not altogether. I mean, most of them were very friendly, but there's a very famous Woodlawn Cemetery, which was part of the romantic cemetery trend, where people in New York would take a picnic out there, and it's a beautiful landscaped with huge, Montgomery Ward and all these robber baron, huge mausoleums, but you might appreciate this. Sir Miles Davis, let you know he's Sir Miles Davis on his huge headstone right across from It escapes me. Duke Ellington's family. And there's another famous like jazz bassist who's buried in that corner. The Marx Brothers' parents are buried there. I came across that section of the cemetery, and I had to kowtow to Minnie and Frenchie Marx, So it's very cool. But one of my favorite places in the cemetery is Herman Melville. His son and his wife are buried there. But that was back before, entombing the body and whatnot. So there's people go there and will leave seashells, and which is very apropos for Herman and the family. But there's a huge oak tree that I imagine was kind of raised on vitamin M. So I
What's
think
vitamin M?
Melville.
Oh, Melville. Okay.
I think it was.
Okay.
I think Melville helped the Melville family helped that oak tree. I'm thinking back when he was buried back in the day. Yeah, probably not involved.
Cemeteries were, at one time, we didn't have, in this country, we didn't have national parks. We didn't have places to go. So cemeteries were, that's where you would go on a Saturday or Sunday after church and go have a picnic.
That's precisely what that was. Yeah, the whole romantic cemetery movement.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful place to walk, and I took great advantage of it the 3 or so years I was living there. Hello to everybody in Woodlawn. Maybe we can kind of step back into I'm wondering how the pandemic has directly influenced your aspect of the industry, and what's that doing? Are people being displaced from the end of life celebration movement? Or are people doing okay?
No, people are not doing okay. People are never going to be doing okay. That's why they need you, and they need me. I think we're on hold, and I'm in the special events industry. So even though I'm in the funeral industry, I produce live events, and a live event is celebration of life memorial or any other gathering, trade shows, conferences. Conventions, on and on and on. We're not there yet. It will come back. I know it. People in my industry know it. We can feel it. It's starting. It's just starting here. We're talking here on June 18th. It's just starting. So. No doubt it will come back, and we have to do it. People are going to have to do it. Mm-hmm. And what's it done for me? It's given me more resolve that what I'm doing as somebody disrupting the funeral industry. It's given me more resolve that we're doing exactly the right thing. And everybody that I've talked to, including people in the profession, recognize this, and they're like, "Yep, Eric, you're on it. You're on it. It's going to happen."
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's a matter of kind of waiting it out.
Good. Yeah, we're not there yet.
But almost, we'll see.
Almost.
We'll see what the turnaround time is. But, well, certainly you have a lot of understanding about this process. I'm curious, is there any advice you could give for people who are kind of in a holding pattern for a memorial service? How to hold the grief maybe creatively, or how to wait things out? What would you advise for people?
I advise them to give me a call, and let's get going. Let's start working on it. It takes, like any event, like a wedding, like any event, anybody that's ever produced any kind of an event, it takes work and it takes energy. And I think, especially with a memorial, or you're going to do a celebration and you've got a ton of pictures, photographs. Somebody that had a full life, he was 103 years old when he died, when he passed. He had a giant, an epic life of adventures. And that included photos of, everything going back to old paper photos that needed to be fixed and cracked and color corrected and to slides and all of that stuff. It's very, very time consuming to pull together somebody's life in photos. So my advice to anybody that has lost somebody, start working on that. That's a very therapeutic and beautiful way to work through your grief. You don't have to do it rushed, and do it in a way that's reverent and thoughtful and helps you with your battle. That's my advice to anybody that's lost anybody. And that, yes, start to plan to get that final gathering together. It's going to take some time. You're going to need time to do that. You're going to have a difficult time finding a place to host your memorial, because you're up against a lot of people that are doing exactly the same thing. So any special, I like special event venues to go to, because they're not. I don't like hotels. I do not like hotels. So I'm talking.
The reason being is it's just.
I do not like hotels.
What if it's a 5-star, Eric, with 5-star with like in service, room service, and
no,
I'm just joking.
It's the whole corporateness of it all.
Okay,
the dryness in the corp. Yeah, it's just I don't know anybody, unless you're in a 5-star hotel, that's going to take really good care of you. But I like going off, what we call it in my business. It's off-site. So that's that's putting up a tent, or that's going to a historic mansion or a preserve, or a botanical garden, or some natural setting that's outside. That's a typical wonderful kind of venue for both me and my clients.
Let me ask you this. The person who's dealing with this grief and isn't at the stage where they're ready to call someone like yourself, and they might have to wait a year before doing something, what's your advice to them? I mean, I assume you probably would still give them the same advice to go through photos and mementos and things like that. But what's another way they can emotionally hold this process and process it? Hold it, the feelings, and process it. I'm just curious if you have any idea.
Yeah, I think to give ourselves permission that it's okay to postpone and not feel crushed or guilty. It's okay. The person who has died, and they have moved on. But their memory hasn't moved on. That's going to be there with you forever. So I think it's okay to give yourself permission to go, look, I'm just not emotionally there. We're just coming out of a pandemic, and we're all in grief right now. We're all still in shock and awe of what just happened. And before this session started, you and I were talking about India, that they're going through the worst of it right now. So we are not out.
We're not out. And certainly, as I made mention on other broadcasts recently, one with my friend Margot Esther Borden, who has left India precisely around a few weeks after I left. We're both of the mind that it was kind of like leaving India was like leaving the fire and jumping back into the frying pan here. And so the variant that's very contagious that's there is here, and 42% of us are only vaccinated fully, which could mean we might be in for pockets and waves of this. And you have hubs in Atlanta where there's a Delta hub and people are traveling all over the place. It's going to spread. So yeah, we're not quite out of it yet, but hopefully there will be some relief and we can move on a bit. But I kind of interrupted you, so maybe we can go back to what your thought was there.
No, my thought is I think we have enough pressure on ourselves. If we've lost somebody, I think it's okay to take a break. It's okay.
listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know that the Psychology Talk podcast has a Facebook page and an Instagram page? It's true. You can find more information about other guests and episodes, as well as more information about psychology and mental health. And if you liked this episode, go ahead and like us on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, or Spotify and leave a review. It helps us grow our audience and provide more quality shows. All material, copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.